Welcome, everyone, to the PFF Fantasy Podcast. I'm John Macri, and I am joined once again by the great Nathan Jahnke. The Eagles are world champs once again, and with that, the 2024-2025 NFL season is wrapped, and we can officially start the off season. So, how you doing? You got the Eagles jersey on, obviously. Happy with the win there.
Yep, got Jalen Hurts jersey on. We got the MVP. I was happy with the victory. It's something where it seems like the past 3 years, the Chiefs seem to be underdog in a lot of playoff games and still ended up winning. So it's like, okay, at some point, some of these stats that are showing some of these teams are better than the Chiefs should actually play out. And it actually did this time.
Yeah, it was a good. Look, it wasn't like a close or exciting game at all. Like it looked like it was going to be kind of controversial early on with that offensive pass interference call against AJ Brown. But I mean, after that, the Eagles just kind of ran away with it and dominated that game. So, kind of surprising to see. But yeah, I mean, I think there was a lot of people happy with not seeing the Chiefs get the three-peat there. I know it sucks for Chiefs fans, but a little bit of parity, it never hurts, right? So, but more importantly, for fantasy football, then the Super Bowl, like I said before, we're on to the off season, and for dynasty players, that means it's the on season as we get startup drafts and trades and rookie drafts, all that fun stuff here over the next few months. So what better way to kick off the proverbial on season than with a look at the top 12 of Nate's dynasty rankings. You could find the full list of 200 players ranked on pff.com for free right now, but we're going to get into detail here on the top 12, Nate. So without further ado, let's get into it and start things off with the player that we talked about as wide receiver one just a week ago for the 2025 season, and the overall 101 for 2025 a little bit before that. So it's only right that Ja'Marr Chase of the Cincinnati Bengals leads the way once again for the dynasty rankings. If you're starting your franchise today, there is nobody that you'd rather have than Ja'Marr Chase.
I think a big part of that is just the situation he's in Cincinnati compared to some of these other wide receivers where you know who the quarterback is, you know who the head coach is, you know they're going to be there for a long time. For this, I looked a little bit at who are our top 10 graded quarterbacks in terms of passing over the past 2 years, our top 10 wide receivers, our top 10 tight ends, the Bengals being one of the few teams that has a top 10 quarterback and a top 10 wide receiver. Other quarterbacks who have played well and also have good receivers. The Lions with Jared Goff, but they have both Amon-Ra St. Brown and Sam Laporta, and Goff's on the older age for quarterbacks. The Dolphins have Tua, Tyreek Hill, and Jonnu Smith, but it's Hill and Smith who are both on the older side. And then the Ravens with Lamar Jackson, and then both their tight ends rank in the top 10, but they are both competing for playing time. Also on a little bit the older side for Mark Andrews, where the Bengals are the one where they have just one top 10 receiver along with the top 10 quarterback. And then a lot of other good quarterbacks don't have as good of receivers. A lot of good receivers don't have as good of quarterbacks. So this is the kind of perfect marriage between an elite quarterback. We have the second highest graded passer over the past 2 years, and then Ja'Marr Chase. So I think they will continue to be great for a long, long time. Chase older than a couple of the other wide receivers we'll talk about, but I think the quarterback situation helped overcome that.
Yeah, a little bit older than some of them, but I mean, he's only going to be turning 25 years old in a few weeks. So he's pretty young and has already put together, 4 NFL seasons of kind of high end production. But I think that this past season, I think really solidified him as that wide receiver one, where he secured the receiver triple crown, right? Led the league in receiving yards, receptions, receiving touchdowns. And then, like you said, it's such an important part of Chase's value, at least as far as kind of giving him the edge over everyone else. Is having one of the best quarterbacks in the league throwing them the ball every week. And that should be the case for years to come. There's no concerns there that he's going to be in a situation with below average quarterback play where, that maybe can't be said for some of the other elite talents at the position who we'll get into later, I'm sure. But yeah, Chase just has everything going for him coming out of this season. He really just checks all the boxes that we're hoping to check for a dynasty wide receiver. So yeah, I'm with you that Chase is wide receiver 1 and 101 for me as well. Now, depending on which position you value more for dynasty, some might want to go for the top running back available. And Nate, your top running back is Bijan Robinson of the Atlanta Falcons. He's RB1 for 2025 as well. And that doesn't change for you in dynasty formats. Bijan comes in as the second best dynasty option for you right now.
Yeah, in general, in recent seasons, I've gone more and more wide receiver heavy early in my dynasty rankings. But Bijan Robinson, it feels like everything is pretty much perfect for a running back at this spot. He's 22 years old right now. At the end of the season, his usage was ramped up rather than ramped down, like you sometimes see with running backs who have gone through a lot over the course of the season. Was playing at least 75% of snaps each of the last 5 weeks, was at over 87% the past 2 weeks of the season, was handling at least 76% of the carries, 13% of the targets those past couple weeks. So he was having a ton of great usage, especially at the end of the season. He was our second highest graded running back this past year, only behind Derrick Henry, who is significantly older and doesn't have the same receiving. So Robinson, a pretty clear top running back from that perspective in terms of both fantasy production, usage, and talent. And his offensive line was the highest graded run blocking offensive line this past year. Drew Dahlman's a free agent. Hopefully they're able to re-sign him. They do have the tackles who are getting a little bit up there in age, but they at the very least, have their 2 guards who are very good. All 5 of the offensive linemen, at least a 70 run blocking grade this past season. So everything's gone right for him. And when you look at like positional scarcity, there's only so many running backs that are younger that we can be confident are good and have high usage. So, part of it as well as there's so many good wide receivers where there's only so many good running backs. So that for me pushes Robinson all the way up to number 2.
Yeah, I agree. I've typically been in the same kind of mindset as you, like where, going with those young elite wide receivers over all else in Dynasty, since we know that there tends to be, more longevity there at the position. So you could maybe squeeze more value out of wide receiver than you can running back because they'll give you more useful years. But that being said, like the running back position, the highs of that position offer so much, better on a per season basis. So if you can lock up a young running back who has that overall RB1 potential and can potentially return that value or close to it for multiple seasons, then it's definitely worth taking that shot and paying the high price. And like you said, the wide receiver pool is also deeper. So the rarity of being able to lock up a top running back like a Bijan Robinson also got to play into this ranking. So if you're going to be hammering the wide receiver position a little later, it makes sense to grab at least one running back who you believe can be a locked in weekly starter for you for years to come. So like I said, I like to go wide receiver heavy and grab a bunch of like kind of 1-year starters at running back to fill that void, because there are kind of new ones every year. But no matter how you address the position, I think the one thing that for sure is, like you laid out, is that Bijan Robinson is among the top dynasty assets at the position and overall as well. So I like the spot here at him coming in at 102 for you. Let's go on to 103 now. Wide receiver 2 for you, Nate. Just 1 year older than Ja'Marr Chase and 1 more year in the league, but still no doubt that he's in that conversation of being one of the top dynasty assets still heading into 2025. He is currently number 3 for you, Justin Jefferson of the Minnesota Vikings.
Oh, yeah. And like everyone knows how excellent of a player Jefferson is. So I'm probably going to continue talking about why I have him at 3 rather than at number 2, which consensus rankings right now have Jefferson at 2. And part of it for me is I probably take into account age more than other dynasty managers, at least when I compare my rankings to consensus rankings. The past few years I've seen age play more of a factor in my rankings than other rankings. Part of that, at least for me, has been with trades, being able to trade away some of the players who are older, but also just how much longer does a player have. And at wide receiver, we have seen cases recently where a lot of elite wide receivers stop being elite around the age of 30 or so. And part of it is there's so many good wide receivers that you can get young wide receivers to play bigger roles in the offense once a wide receiver gets a little bit older. So we've seen guys like Julio Jones see his last 800-yard season at age 30. Antonio Brown, his last 800-yard season at age 30. DeAndre Hopkins at 31. Calvin Johnson was at 30. AJ Green, if you up that to 1,000 yards, his last great season was at age 29. So Jefferson, who will be 26 by the start of next season, might only have 4 or 5 good years at wide receiver left in him. So when you compare that to some other players on the list, like a Bijan Robinson, where running backs typically to age like 29 or 30 or so as well, that means Robinson probably has more great seasons left than Jefferson has. There's still like injury risk and that kind of stuff in there, but Jefferson, there is the uncertainty of how good his quarterback will be in there as well. So, and Jefferson is coming off of his worst season of the last couple of seasons. So the fact that he had a down year also plays into it as well. Like, there's at least a chance we've already seen Jefferson peak.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think the quarterback question, is definitely a part of it too, right? Like, there's really nothing that Minnesota can do this offseason that's going to kind of clear up the question of how good his quarterback is going to be, or improve that quarterback situation over what we think of Ja'Marr Chase and Joe Burrow, for example, right? So that does separate them. And it doesn't change the fact that Jefferson, like individual of the situation around him, arguably the best wide receiver in the NFL still. 4 straight seasons of 90+ receiving yards and overall grades to start his career. Like you said, a career worst year. Like, he didn't quite get there this year, but it was pretty close. He still put up nearly 1,600 receiving yards, 10 receiving touchdowns, and finished as the wide receiver 2 for the year. Like, I wouldn't be surprised at all if he finishes as wide receiver 1 next year, or multiple times in the next couple of years. Like, even if he does start to get older and that dynasty value might drop slightly because of it, I just think Jefferson, he'll be in that wide receiver 1 overall conversation every year for the next couple of years. And I think that makes him pretty valuable for dynasty, obviously, and keeper formats, hence obviously your top 3 ranking here. And yeah, if you're not into running backs as much for dynasty, then potentially top 2 as well. But yeah, still a lot to like about Justin Jefferson. Nate, moving on to 104 now. You continue to mix it up with some variety of positions as we go back and forth between wide receivers and running backs here early on. Now, a running back, Jahmyr Gibbs, comes in as your RB2 right now.
Oh, yeah, he's another running back, only 23 years old, and he's the first player that my rankings differ a bit from my redraft rankings and my dynasty rankings. And for me, part of that is I'm more decently confident that Gibbs will stay in a 2 running back committee at least to start this upcoming year. But I feel like as time goes on, there's bound to be a point where Gibbs starts to see more playing times, more so than what we've seen before. And it doesn't have to be David Montgomery not being in the offense at all. It can be slight shifts of maybe Gibbs plays 5% more and Montgomery 5% less, and that's enough to put Gibbs even higher. He was the 8th overall running back in fantasy points per game last year, and that's when he's in a timeshare at running back, where all the other running backs in the top 10 more clear top lead running backs on their team. So Gibbs, I think, is someone who over time will get closer and closer to that number 1 overall running back. Again, another running back where his offensive line is excellent. We know his situation is going to stay good, even though they lost their offensive coordinator. Dan Campbell's not going anywhere anytime soon. They have a lot of players in place in offense to keep them good on offense for a long time. And there are very few young running backs that are in good situations. There's a reason where Robinson and Gibbs are ahead of everyone else. It's because their team used the draft capital on them, where basically no other team has used that high of draft capital on their running backs. And they have excellent offensive lines where other running backs don't have as good of offensive lines. So their situations put them far apart from a lot of the other running backs.
Mm-hmm. I think that makes sense. I mean, Gibbs, he's right there with Bijan at this point, right? Like, it's super close. I mean, both guys drafted together inside the top 12 of the first round as well. And another one of those elite options at the running back position, like you laid out, that I definitely agree with you in putting Gibbs in consideration as a top dynasty option who will likely feel comfortable leaving locked into starting lineups for the next few years, and one that, like Bijan, has that kind of dual threat ability where he'll get strong utilization as a receiver on top of his rushing usage. And like you said, even with David Montgomery in the picture, like, Gibbs is one of the most productive running backs at the position. And then with the potential of Montgomery not being in the lineup, like we saw this past year for that late stretch of games in the fantasy playoffs, he can be more productive than any other running back in the league. He was RB1 for fantasy, right? So there's always the possibility that he kind of takes over that role completely one day, like you said. Though I think, yeah, Montgomery's still signed through like 2027. So who knows when that'll actually happen or not. But either way, Gibbs is undoubtedly one of the better young players at the position. And that translates to his fantasy and his dynasty value quite a bit here, coming in at 104 for you. All right, Nate, the back and forth between the wide receivers and the running backs continue here as we go over to another top young wide receiver. And the first player on this list who wasn't a former first-round pick in the NFL draft, hell, he wasn't even a day 2 pick, but immediately made it clear that this was a mistake by the NFL in his first NFL game, and he hasn't looked back since. Puka Nacua is wide receiver 3 and 105 in your dynasty ranks, Nate.
Yeah, we'll be 24 by next season. So the youngest wide receiver we've talked about so far was our highest graded wide receiver this season, even though it was on a somewhat smaller sample size because he missed those games early in the season. And that's including the playoffs, 3.23 yards per route run, nearly a half yard better than every other wide receiver when including the playoffs. So he was excellent as a wide receiver. My only concern for him in the short term is at the quarterback position. It sounds like Matthew Stafford will likely remain the Rams quarterback this upcoming year, and we don't know who the quarterback will be long term, but Stafford isn't quite the same quarterback he once was, even though he was still able to lead the team to the playoffs and everything. But even though I do have concerns about the quarterback position, he should at least have Sean McVay for the foreseeable future as his head coach, and knowing that he has him as a head coach gives me a bit more confidence that even though I don't know who the quarterback will be in 2026 or 2027, that they'll at least figure out a strong enough option, and McVay can coach them to be a good enough option to keep Puka Nacua as an elite fantasy wide receiver.
Yeah, that offense has, utilizing Nacua as like the wide receiver 1 that he's been has been a huge part of it. Like we've referenced that insane target rate from Puka already a couple times this offseason, 37% target rate in the regular season. So I had to go back and look up to just see how crazy that number actually is. And then dating back to 2006, so all of the PFF era, Puka Nacua's 37% target rate is the highest mark across all positions in any regular season for any player who ran at least 100 routes. The next closest is Demaryius Thomas in 2010, who just barely met the routes threshold with 101, and Puka ran more than 200, almost 200 more routes than that. So really the next closest, if we're using a larger route threshold, would have actually been Tyreek Hill in 2023. He had 35.5% target rate. So back-to-back seasons, we've gotten those kind of historic target rates from our wide receivers. Now I guess the question is, who will top Puka in 2024 if that, or 2025 if that trend continues. But back to kind of Puka and his situation. Like you said, there's this situation with the quarterback as well, where there's also trade and retirement rumors of Matthew Stafford now this offseason, which again, it creates kind of those significant question marks for the quarterback situation. They aren't like a Minnesota Vikings, for example, who have a young quarterback in waiting, and knowing just how reliant Stafford has been with his wide receiver 1, whether it was Cooper Kupp or Puka Nacua after that. We just don't know if someone else will come in and provide that same level of value. It's hard to say, but like you said, Sean McVay staying there does help, and targets are earned, right? And Puka has proven that he's a star and he can earn targets. So even though we haven't seen him without Stafford, that doesn't mean it can't happen. I'll just be very curious to know who is going to be throwing him the ball in 2025 and beyond. Like you said, it sounds like Stafford for one more season here, but there's at least question marks about that as things kind of shake out here throughout the offseason and potentially next season. Okay, from one questionable quarterback situation to another now, heading to the New York Giants and their star wide receiver, Malik Nabers, who comes in as wide receiver 4 and the 106 in your dynasty ranks, Nate. The Giants at least might have the opportunity to draft a young rookie quarterback of the future to pair with Nabers for the foreseeable future. But either way, just like Puka, Nabers already proving to be an elite target earner coming out of year 1, and no real reason to believe that'll change heading into year 2, 3, 4, etc.
Yeah, should be 22 years old by next season, so a good 2 years younger than Nacua, so that's a positive for Nabers, and had a very good rookie season. Top 10 receiving grade, was very consistent in terms of his targets, his receiving yards, which was all good to see. For me, the big thing is the question marks around basically the entire rest of the offense. You can look even beyond the quarterback situation in 2026. I don't know who's going to be the general manager, who's going to be the head coach, who's going to be the quarterback. Even though Tyrone Tracy had an okay rookie season, that doesn't necessarily mean he'll be the long-term running back. Don't know who the other wide receivers will be, tight end. It seems like outside of Nabers, it's only really like Andrew Thomas at offensive line, the only other player that they can really build around on the offense. So just the uncertainty of knowing how everything's going to look. And for me, it's not just how if the quarterback's going to be throwing to the wide receiver enough, it's if the quarterback is going to be good enough to keep the offense on the field for longer drives. So I can trust Sean McVay can take a average to below average quarterback and turn it into a pretty good offense, which will keep the offense on the field, keep them on scoring possibilities, where I don't know if that's going to happen with the Giants. It seems like a pretty big consensus in terms of mock drafts puts Shedeur Sanders as the quarterback of the Giants, but he's someone that on our big board ranks in the 40s, which is not a very great sign. We've seen plenty of other quarterbacks rank in the 40s in our big board not work out well in the NFL. So even though it sounds like they'll get a rookie quarterback this year, I don't know how good that'll be for the offense. So a ton of question marks. The only question mark that isn't there is we know Nabers is a very talented young wide receiver. So that alone puts him number 6 on the list. But there's a lot of question marks, which is why even though Nacua is a little bit older, I have Nacua higher than Nabers, even though consensus rankings have those two flipped around.
Yeah, for sure. The talent is without question, right? And we know that whoever is going to be a quarterback, they're going to funnel targets to Malik Nabers. I mean, this was another thing that we mentioned last week when we were going over the wide receivers. But, you know, even though it was overshadowed by Puka's ridiculous 37% target rate, Nabers' 29.7% target rate was second best of 2024. That's nothing to scoff at, even though Puka's was so much higher, because that's a really impressive number for a rookie, mind you, and the 8th best mark among all wide receivers since 2020, behind guys like Tyreek Hill, Antonio Brown, Cooper Kupp, Devontae Adams. So really encouraging company there for Nabers. Like, I would imagine that he's only going to get better, at least as far as efficiency as well, because he wasn't anywhere near to the level of those kind of same guys as far as, you know, yards per route run and things like that. But again, they weren't rookies either, and they had all established quarterbacks throwing them the ball, where Nabers definitely has room for improvement in that regard, like you said. So I think there's at least a chance that, you know, Nabers is in that kind of wide receiver 2, maybe wide receiver 1 conversation for Dynasty, with an ideal quarterback situation coming out of next season. But it's just right now, we just don't know what that'll look like you said. So I'm still willing to bet on the talent here among the top 6 where you have him. And that situation is going to improve at some point soon, even if maybe it isn't immediately in 2025. Okay, let's do a quick ad break, and then we'll get into the final 6 here of the top 12. And this is from our friends at Fabric by Gerber Life. The new year is a great time to reevaluate financial goals, not just for yourself, but for your kids. Now is the perfect time to make sure your kids are on a path toward a solid financial future. A kid's investment account from Fabric by Gerber Life is quick and simple to set up and lets you invest in their future now for education, big milestones, and more. Fabric by Gerber Life was designed by parents for parents to make it easy to plan for and manage your family's financial path. With a kid's investment account from Fabric, you can start investing in your child's future today. Kids can't invest when they're minors, but a kid's investment account allows you to invest on their behalf now, giving their investments more time to grow. It's all online, and setting up an account can take you just 5 minutes. Then you can manage your child's account and monitor their investments right from your phone. Funds can be used for nearly anything, benefiting your child from tuition and tutors to music classes. And when they're adults and out on their own, they can use the funds for anything they need. Join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to help protect their family. Start investing in your child today at meetfabric.com/fantasy. That's meetfabric.com/fantasy, meetfabric.com/fantasy. Portfolios managed by Fort Washington Investment Advisors, Inc. Additional services provided by Apex Clearing Corporation. All investing is subject to risk. Learn more at meetfabric.com. All right, Nate, we've talked wide receivers and running backs exclusively here, but the first tight end makes an appearance next. The tight end 1 from the 2024 season, another rookie from this past year who we can probably bet on an improved situation around him in the next few years. Brock Bowers of the Las Vegas Raiders comes in as the 107 for you right now.
Oh, yeah. And we've talked about Bowers both on the tight end episode a week ago. So if you missed the tight end episode, definitely check that out. And we talked about him again in the top 12 overall players for the 2025 season. So I don't think there's any real question that Bowers is the top tight end option, both in redraft and in Dynasty. So for me, a lot of this is positional scarcity and how many tight ends you can draft in Dynasty that you can be comfortable with compared to how many wide receivers or how many running backs. And because there are so few good tight ends out there, that pushes Bowers all the way to the middle of the first round for me. There's really only Bowers, Trey McBride, and Sam Laporta as the three tight ends that you can draft in Dynasty and be pretty confident they'll still be your fantasy starter at tight end in like 2 years from now. If you look at consensus rankings after that, it's George Kittle, who will be 31 at the start of next season, Hawkinson, who will be 28, Mark Andrews, who will be 30, David Njoku, who will be 29, all ages where it wouldn't be at all surprising if they're not starters in 2 years from now. And even in the top 12 still is Travis Kelce, who might end up retiring, but is 35, and Evan Ingram, who will be 31, and I'm not even confident he'll be starting tight end for the Jaguars this upcoming season. So there's really not a ton of great options at the position, where at wide receiver, like we were just talking about Malik Nabers, other highly drafted rookies last year, like Marvin Harrison Jr., didn't have as excellent of a rookie season, which is why he's not in these top 12 wide receivers. But it wouldn't be at all surprising if he ends up being excellent wide receiver this year and then moves up the dynasty rankings, or even Rome Odunze with the new offensive coordinator in Chicago. Maybe he has an excellent season this upcoming year. And you could come up with plenty of other wide receivers where they have the talent, and it's just things haven't gone quite right so far in the NFL. But we were saying the same thing about Jackson Smith-Njigba, where he didn't have that strong rookie season and then all of a sudden turned things around this past year. And there's a lot of wide receivers that fit that, where there are not that many tight ends. There's a couple other young tight ends that we've hoped have worked out and haven't quite worked out yet. So because of that, I'd rather pick a tight end early, knowing that I can gamble at a bunch of other wide receivers later, compared to picking another wide receiver at this spot and then being left knowing that I'm not going to be happy with my tight end position later.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. I mean, after that rookie season too, like it's just like I'd be shocked if anybody was arguing anything other than tight end one for Bowers in Dynasty. And I think in this first top 12 here, like 7 where you have him, I think that's a good spot for him. I think a lot of people, we're ready to make this ranking of him tight end one in Dynasty before he even got drafted, considering his profile coming out of college. But it was definitely important to see it in the NFL, right? And we definitely saw it, even if it wasn't the most ideal landing spot with the Raiders, considering we didn't know what to expect from the quarterback situation there. And I mean, I guess we still don't, but they also just spent the second round pick on Michael Mayer the year before. Like there was plenty of skepticism out there about Bowers with the Raiders, but I mean, he still dominated and finished as tight end one on the year. So now who knows what the Raiders quarterback situation is going to look like in 2025. But again, Bowers has already proven that he can be the centerpiece of an offense as a rookie. Like I have to imagine he continues to kind of develop and get better. And hopefully the situation around him will do the same. And hopefully Pete Carroll, won't create any shenanigans as far as rotation at the position or anything like that. That would be nice. But yeah, I'm very optimistic about Brock Bowers. I would be happy to spend up to get him here in Dynasty. Okay, speaking of highly touted rookies, we go from the 2024 version of that to 2025's most dominant player at his position in the class. Ashton Jeanty, Boise State running back, comes in as the 108 for you, Nate. We've talked a bit about Jeanty already this offseason, even though we haven't done like our full rookie deep dive. But expectations are high for this running back prospect, hence the high ranking, and even though we don't know where he might land in the NFL.
Oh, yeah, we've seen plenty of mock drafts that have him going to the Dallas Cowboys at 12, but now I've seen plenty of mock drafts that have him going even earlier. Have seen a number of him going to the Raiders at 6, getting in Chip Kelly's offense, which would be nice to see. Some as well. missing the other situation, but the Bears, of course, the other one at 10. Now that they have Ben Johnson as the offensive coordinator, having Jeanty in that offense could be huge considering how big the running backs were for the Detroit Lions. So all three of those teams, whether it's the Raiders, Bears, or Cowboys, all of them have at least average offensive lines, so they'd be pretty decent situations that they'd be going into. And all three of those teams don't have the best running back situations. The closest one is the Bears with DeAndre Swift, which I wouldn't be surprised if he's not on the team at the start of the year or just becomes a backup or a receiving option for the team. But the 1 year that Swift and Ben Johnson were in the same offense was his lowest in terms of career rushing attempts and that kind of stuff. So wouldn't be surprised if Swift doesn't have a huge role in the Bears offense. So I think any of these situations, Jeanty would be a clear top 10 fantasy running back, if not higher, in his rookie season, considering how much he would get used and how much talent he has. We've seen the same thing with the Falcons and the Lions, with them drafting running backs very highly and them turning into the top 2 running backs on the list. So I think Jeanty has an excellent opportunity to have success immediately in the NFL and remain one of these top fantasy running backs for a long time.
Yeah, it's definitely looking very encouraging for him. Like I've been pulling a lot of the data for this year's draft class in recent weeks. And one of the pieces I'll have coming out on Friday takes a look at like the 2025 running back class, how they stack up according to like PFF's key stable metrics over the past 2 seasons combined. And spoilers, but Jeanty dominated those metrics across the board. He ranked first in every single stable metric rushing category that we have since 2023, rushing grade, missed tackles forced per attempt, yards after contact per attempt. And then even in receiving grade, he was top 3. So we're looking at kind of a pretty remarkable college profile, and one that I think would be like a true shock if it didn't translate to the NFL and obviously for fantasy. Even if he didn't do it in the Power 5, like Bijan Robinson, our Dynasty RB1 here, for example, he did outperform Bijan in a few key college metrics for his career, including yards after contact per attempt, rushing grade versus a stacked box, and then even career yards per route run as a receiver. So there's plenty of encouraging data to say that Jeanty could be on that same level. And I think, the right landing spot, like you said, and then even just meeting expectations in year 1, he could become that RB1 in Dynasty as well. All right. While Jeanty is new to Dynasty rankings, let's go on to someone who is no stranger to the top of Dynasty rankings. Wide receiver CeeDee Lamb of the Dallas Cowboys is up next, coming in as wide receiver 5 and the 109 for you, Nate. Lamb had a down year relative to his expectations in 2024, but he'll be just 26 years old and still plenty to love about the Cowboys wide receiver 1.
Yeah, I have him a bit lower in my Dynasty rankings than a lot of other people do. So Lamb, obviously very talented wide receiver. Just 2023, he was the top wide receiver in fantasy football, but I am concerned that he did have that down year this past year. Part of that was the quarterback situation, but even before that, he wasn't putting up as many fantasy points as the year before with Dak Prescott. And at 26 years old for next year, joins Justin Jefferson as the oldest players that we've been talking about so far on this list. And Lamb having a bit lower of a year. Also a little bit concerned with the coaching situation that they had. I'm not entirely excited about having Brian Schottenheimer as the head coach, and then Dak Prescott, he'll be 32 for next year. So if anything, Prescott is on the back half of his career as well. So because of that, I'm not sure Lamb will have quite as good of a season. Definitely, I don't think he'll get to where he was in 2023, but I'm more confident in the other wide receivers on this list because we've had wide receivers on this list who are younger than Lamb, who are better than Lamb this past year. So certainly a chance Lamb rebounds and the Cowboys offense rebounds in a major way, but also a chance that we have seen the best version of this Cowboys offense 2 or 3 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I could see it either way, right? Having him higher or having him in this spot. I think it's fair to kind of bump him down a little bit after last season. But, even without Dak for the latter half of the year, like he was still able to finish as the PPR wide receiver 4 with Cooper Rush throwing him the ball. Had a pretty solid yards per route run. I think it was like 13th at the position, nearly 1,200 receiving yards, which was top 10 for the position, 146 targets, which was 6th. The talent, again, is undeniable, and it's still, he was still able to be productive as he was, again, wide receiver 4 on the year, despite just kind of like league average accuracy in his direction when he was targeted, while also missing week 17 due to injury. Like there's still somehow room for him to bounce back in 2025. I wouldn't put it past him to have like another wide receiver 1 finish or maybe 2 left in his career. Again, just 26 years old and one of the best wide receivers in the league on an offense that is going to probably continue funneling targets in his direction on a weekly basis. If Dak and this offense can kind of get back on track, we'll see what things look like under Schottenheimer. But I think Lamb either way is going to be kind of a prime beneficiary of that if it does happen. And even if they're as average as they were this past season, like he still has that kind of top 5 potential. So definitely plenty of reason, I think, to believe in him as a top 5 dynasty wide receiver still, for sure. Okay, how about a young wide receiver pushing for that top 5 spot, sitting right on the fringe of top 5 after an excellent rookie season in 2024? Jacksonville Jaguars wide receiver Brian Thomas Jr. Nate, how close was it for you as far as considering BTJ in the top 5? Obviously, he comes in at 6, but those top 5 are really hard to move out. So any consideration for BTJ in that top 5 for you after an impressive rookie season?
He is fairly close. A little bit for me will just be how does this offseason turn out for Jacksonville? A little bit more consistency than some of the other situations because we know Trevor Lawrence is going to be the quarterback. I am excited about Liam Cohen as the offensive coordinator. I'll just be curious to see what exactly Thomas's role is in the offense. Mentioned it in the wide receiver episode, but he played so well out of the slot, and we have seen Liam Cohen's offenses have really good success with their slot receivers. I just don't know if that will be Thomas's role in this offense. There are a number of wide receivers who are options for the slot who are available. Like someone like a Cooper Kupp could make a lot of sense for this offense. Someone like a Deebo Samuel, since this is all part of the Shanahan and McVay coaching tree. So there are plenty of options that Jacksonville has to improve the wide receiver room in the offense. So I think he is right pretty close to there. His grade wasn't quite as good as some of these other young wide receivers, like Puka Nacua was the top wide receiver. Malik Nabers was a top 10 wide receiver in terms of grades. So that is also part of what keeps him outside of the top 5. Do want to mention that Thomas and Nabers are 2 of the players who I did not have as first round picks in redraft leagues, but do have them in this first round of dynasty leagues. The 2 players that were in my top 12 of redraft and are not in my top 12 of dynasty, Saquon Barkley and Nico Collins. With Barkley, it's because he's 28 and therefore he might only have a good 2 or 3 years left in him, where I want everyone in these top 12 to have a bit more time left in their career. So that's why Barkley isn't. And even someone like Nico Collins has graded well, but he is also on the older side of these wide receivers that we're talking about. Still not on the old side for wide receivers in general, but it's because of that Collins is just outside of this list as well.
Yeah, it's fair. And look, there's some questions like around Brian Thomas's situation, like you said, right? So, I mean, as much as, having Trevor Lawrence and Liam Cohen in there is probably a good thing for the offense. There's also like questions about, who they add, like you said, maybe Cooper Kupp or Deebo Samuel, but also the return of guys like Christian Kirk and Evan Ingram. Will they eat into Brian Thomas Jr.'s target share at all? Because they weren't really there for the majority of the latter half games where he popped off. But I still agree. Like, I think this is a good spot for him. It's hard to ignore just how good he was in year 1. I definitely came away from that season way more optimistic about BTJ than I was for him heading into his rookie year. I really thought it would be kind of a more difficult path to production than some of the other rookie wide receivers, and that, he was still a little bit raw coming out of LSU, but he proved me wrong. I'm very happy that we got this version of him, because he should be a very fun, very good wide receiver for years to come. And if he doesn't have like a year 2 letdown of any kind, a sophomore slump of any sort, then he's got to keep pushing for that top 5 range next offseason as well. So it should be fun one to monitor here going forward. Okay, how about one more wide receiver who has a shot to be considered in that top 5 at this position? The sun god, Amon-Ra St. Brown of the Detroit Lions, comes in as wide receiver 7 and 111 for you, Nate.
Yeah, I think he is probably the safest player that we're talking about. And in terms of like high risk, high reward, he is kind of on the extreme end of that spectrum, just because we know how talented he is. He's been very consistent in terms of his PFF grade in recent seasons. He's been very consistent in terms of his stats. I just don't see him being that top 1 overall wide receiver, that second overall wide receiver, because of that situation of being with the Detroit Lions that have so many other good options in the offense. Jameson Williams isn't going anywhere anytime soon. Sam Laporta, Jahmyr Gibbs, just because they have so many good options in the offense, they don't need St. Brown to be this huge target hog that a lot of these other wide receivers that we're talking about are. So St. Brown, we saw his target rate decrease this past year as players like Jameson Williams emerged as more of an option in the offense, and they're able to win games and run the ball a ton. And ideally this upcoming season, their defense is able to stay a lot healthier, so they should remain one of these top teams that doesn't need to pass the ball a lot. So they'll still pass the ball enough for St. Brown to be probably a fairly safe top 8 or so wide receiver. I just don't think he has that elite range of outcomes unless there's a number of injuries, like if Sam Laporta suffers an injury or Jameson Williams suffers an injury. Then there's that. And there's also Jared Goff, who is graded well as a quarterback, but we also know Goff is not one of those elite quarterback options either at this point in his career. So a lot of very good things that are great for St. Brown, just not enough for me to consider him among those top 2 or 3 fantasy wide receivers, which is why he is all the way down at 11 on this list.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense, right? Like at the very least, like you said, he's safe. He's been super consistent and reliable over these past 3 years. He finished as wide receiver 7 in 2022, and then back-to-back seasons as the PPR wide receiver 3 in each of the past 2 seasons. But I'm with you in that there's just more mouths to feed in that Lions offense than with almost anyone else on this list. I'd say he has probably the toughest target competition of the bunch between guys like you mentioned, Jameson Williams, Sam Laporta, Jahmyr Gibbs, and that more maybe run heavy approach. So they could all, they could create those kind of weekly lows that hurt his fantasy production, keep him from being that wide receiver 1 overall. But as he showed last year, like his highs will still allow for that kind of high end season finish because he's that good. Those lows are still few and far between for the most part. But yeah, he's another name, that I think is just, again, like you said, safe, I think is a good word for him inside this top 12. And actually one of the other names in this top 12 who wasn't a former first round pick as well, still just 25 years old, ton of games left in his career where, if the past 3 years are any indication, there are some high level expectations. He's now coming off 3 straight seasons with a 90+ receiving grade, as well establishing himself among the very best wide receivers in the league. And then last name that we'll cover on today's show, again, remember to check out Nate's full rankings of Dynasty rankings article on PFF.com right now. You'll get the full 200 for free, but 112 for you, or 112 for you, Nate, and RB4 of the Miami Dolphins. Devon Achane closes out your top 12 here.
Oh, yeah, here it's a lot to do with his talent. He is our 3rd highest graded running back over the past 2 years combined. The only 2 ahead of him, Derrick Henry, James Conner, both on the older range of age for running backs, as well as 2 players who have most of their grade from running the ball and not so much a mix of running and receiving. So Achane being a very well-rounded running back who is graded well in both running the ball and catching the ball. Someone who we saw that high-end fantasy talent anytime Tua was healthy this past season, was, in terms of fantasy points per game, was the highest running back whenever Tua was healthy. But then when Tua wasn't healthy, there was a huge shift in his fantasy points per game. So ideally Tua stays healthy throughout this upcoming season so that Achane can continue to run the ball a ton and catch the ball a ton. So I think for me, the talent is there, the age is there. Hopefully the offense stays there. In terms of offensive lines, the worst offensive line that we've talked about for any of the running backs, including any of the possible landing spots for Jeanty. So hopefully the Dolphins are able to improve their offensive line, which is something that should hopefully happen in the first round of the draft this year, but also potentially a little bit of help coming in free agency as well. So that could be a huge boost for Achane's fantasy value.
Yeah, I mean, he's really interesting, like, because as much as, again, the talent is there, but he delivered on kind of his ADP this season as well, which was one of the more polarizing ADPs of the offseason, I would say. He finished as the PPR RB6, but potentially still has room to improve, like you said, for all those reasons and based on what we saw from him in his rookie year. Now, 4.5 yards per carry, 82.8 rushing grade last year. It's perfectly fine, but it's not nearly as good as the 93.1 rushing grade and 7.5 yards per carry from 2023. And I don't want it to sound like he should get back to those marks, because those are very lofty expectations that he might never repeat again. But at the very least, his 2024 numbers leave room for improvement as a runner, or room to bounce back a little bit. And if he continues to get a strong workload and this Miami offense as a whole can also kind of continue to bounce back, I think he can really benefit from that and be in the consideration for overall RB1 on any given season, if that's the case. So like this spot for Achane as well.
And like, he's someone where I go very heavy in the player usage. And even before last season, I was like, I'm not concerned about the player usage. He's just that good at a workout. Mm-hmm. So even now I'm like, yeah, there's a couple of things that aren't great about what's going on with the Dolphins, but I trust that things will work out, and Achane, his talent will overcome some of those things and allow him to be that elite fantasy option.
Yeah, no, I think it makes sense. Yeah, like you said, I know they drafted another running back last year, Raheem Mostert, getting older. I can't remember if he's a free agent. I don't think he is, right?
I think he's under contract still.
Yeah. So
I don't know if they'll keep him considering his salary and how much he was playing late in the season, but technically under contract still.
Yeah, he's still there, but like you said, he was kind of fading to the background as the season went on there, which makes sense as an older running back. So there's a lot to like still about Achane, but that's going to wrap us up for today. Thank you all for tuning in, whether on YouTube or where you listen to your podcasts. If you wouldn't mind as well to do us one more favor and like and subscribe on the YouTube, or leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. It helps us a ton, and we would greatly appreciate it. Nate, thank you to you as well for putting this list together. And again, you've got the full top 200 Dynasty ranks for free on PFF.com right now, so people got to check that out, right?
I have the top 200 there, and it's kind of going to be a turning point for the offseason for us, since we've spent the past month and a half going over some of these rankings. I know you've got some IDP Dynasty rankings to cover, but then we'll get to start looking to free agency and the draft, and instead of having these top 12 lists, I'll get a little bit more into what's going to be going on with free agency and the draft. So looking forward to spending more of the offseason with you here, because I wasn't able to talk about those kind of things on the podcast last year while I was on the B2B side. So excited to talk free agency, excited to talk draft.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. We got a lot of good content planned here for the off season around, like you said, free agency, the NFL draft, and next week I'll be going over some of my top IDP Dynasty rankings. I posted the top 250 IDP Dynasty rankings in article form on the site for my fellow IDP DGens. That's also free on PFF.com. And then next week, like I said, on the podcast, I'll be covering them in more detail, giving some individual rationale for each player and their rankings and stuff like that. And then we'll get into some of the free agency prep as well, Nate. So it's going to be a lot of fun. But until then, enjoy the off season. Thank you all again for tuning in. And until next time, peace out.